And we are recording. Kenrick, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Aaron, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How have you been?
Oh, good. Oh, good. There's a lot of working from home these days, but it's not too bad being in Singapore. So
Yeah, to be clear for the YouTube viewers, your background is not actually your home. It is not actually
it's
your background right
yeah,
now.
it's wishful thinking on my part.
Yeah. So I invited you back because I'd like to get an update on what's been going on in Singapore. It's been in the news over the past week or so. But there are probably people listening that maybe haven't seen that episode. So maybe we should start with a really brief recap. Last time you were on, it was on the 27th of March. And at that time, Singapore was just going into lockdown. Basically, it was just starting that restaurants were starting to close and people were supposed to keep a meter distance from each other or something like that.
Yeah.
Right? That's sort of where we were back then.
Yeah,
Do you,
absolutely. I think,
do you,
yeah, so like in general, as a recap, so kind of things started with the whole Corona COVID thing here in late January. Um, Pretty early on, like they were very quick to kind of close the borders here when reports of China like came in, and then Korea was next, they closed down, and then after that it was like Italy that was closed down, and then more and more countries came and more kind of flights were banned from coming into Singapore. Like if you arrived by airplane, you would be checked your temperature. Like if there was any suspicion of you having a fever, they would take you straight away into testing and isolation. So they're very good for like 2 months in tracing everybody basically. Like basically every case that there was, and there was less than 100 every day. They were very good at kind of keeping track of like who has it and who have they been in contact with. They were basically able to trace every, or not every, but almost every case back to a specific source or cluster. So there were a few clusters. I think there was one from a church gathering and one or two other ones. But yeah, it was pretty well tracked and traced, so to say. And then like
when
stay home notice.
and
Sorry.
when we spoke, Singapore was still sort of presented often as the country that's handling it the best, or one of the countries that's handling it very well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So they've introduced like over time more and more measures, but they're always been quite when we spoke, I think the schools were still open. They have since closed. Um, the stay home notices, like those were very strict. So if you were issued a stay home notice, means you have to stay in your home for 14 days. They would actually check that by coming to your home, or there's an app that you need to submit pictures that you're actually at home, or they call you. A friend of mine received one of those, and he was like, shit, like they check on me 3 times a day, I'm definitely not going out. So that was quite strict. But at the time, like the restaurants were still open, so they just organized it in such a way that you had to stay like 1 or 1.5 meters away from each other.
Right.
So that was happening. Basically, everything was still functioning, but with measures in place, I would say. Large gatherings were canceled. People were encouraged to work from home, but most offices were also still open. So I think that was the last time that we spoke.
Yeah.
Since then, so there have been more and more of these kind of untracked cases where they weren't able to determine the source. And
Community
since
spread.
then, yeah, so basically like, what is it, last week or like, I think 10 days ago or so, they said, okay, we're introducing a circuit breaker, which was 4 weeks, 2 incubation cycles of a circuit breaker, they call it here, whatever that is, whatever you want to call it, lockdown, circuit breaker. Basically all offices except for essential services are closed. Everybody's supposed to work from home. Essential services are still open. Restaurants are still open, but only for takeaway. Um, so I think they had a pretty good script, like exactly what are we going to close, what are we going to keep open. So you can still go to your favorite restaurant, you just have to do a takeaway. I can still get a haircut, but you can only get a haircut, and the hairdresser is not allowed to do like coloring or some fancy stuff. But if you want a haircut, if you need a haircut, you can still get it.
Right.
So
So it
another
sounds
measure that
So it sounds
Sorry?
fair. It sounds fairly similar to what's going on in a lot of other countries, but I think
Yeah.
if, but you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. It looks like Singapore is doing it sooner in the curve, so to say, compared to other countries, because other countries like the Netherlands, where you're also originally from, and we've seen it throughout Europe a lot, they kind of really only started doing that right at the point where the hospitals are balking under the pressure, and at that point, while Singapore seems to have started doing that when they noticed, okay, there is community spread, let's start.
Yeah, I think it's quite clear that their strategy is still like, we want to isolate this thing and want to eradicate all cases, rather than like slow spread as kind of the strategy in Europe. So because like the headlines these days is now that there is a lot of cases in Singapore, but it's actually a little bit misleading. So I just saw the headline of today, which says there's a daily high of 942 cases.
Is
But
that
that's actually
the Dutch news?
sorry.
Is that the Dutch news?
No, it's on Channel News Asia.
Because someone just sent me a Dutch article, but never mind. Continue.
Okay. Yeah, so it's 942 cases today, but it's only 14 cases like within the community, as they call it, and all the other cases are within the dormitories of the foreign workers. So Singapore relies a lot on kind of foreign labor, right? So I think there's 3.2 million residents here in the city, which is either Singaporean citizens or PRs. And then there's, I think, another 1.3, like, don't quote me on the numbers, but at least another million people here, foreigners on work passes or employment passes. And of those, I think there's around 200,000 people who work in construction. And most of those, they live in kind of dormitories. And
yeah, these are people from countries like India, China, Indonesia, right? Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that is correct. So there have been big clusters there, but those are kind of isolated. Like, those people are not kind of able to, like, I don't know the specific situation on the ground there, but those people are not allowed to travel out of those dormitories for now. They're not allowed to just go into Singapore. So
they usually
the community cases. Sorry? They
usually are?
I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure how it works. I think they've isolated it now. I'm assuming usually they are able to travel through the city, but now it's isolated and they're testing everybody. So they're finding each and every case, basically, of those 200,000 workers that are there. So it's still pretty well managed, because the community cases, like, so in the city, if you like, those are coming down. It's only 14 today, 14. So I'm assuming that by the 4th of May, when the circuit breaker is supposed to end, that those community cases have come down so far that you should be able to trace all of them back to individual cases again and isolate them.
Right. So it sounds almost like there are two Singapores. There's Singapore for Singaporeans and permanent residents. I guess that's what PR means, right? You mentioned it.
Yeah.
You are, so that would be you, for example, you're a PR.
I'm on an employment pass, so I'm not within that population, but like the construction workers, then that's a different part again. They have different passes, basically. Yeah.
Right. And they're in the country for a very specific construction job or something like that?
Usually, yes. Yeah, most of the construction work here is being done by these people. Yeah.
And they live
they live in dormitories that is provided by the companies providing them employment. Yes.
Right. And that's quite separated from the rest of Singapore then, or how should I?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, okay. And that's where the outbreak is really happening. So the numbers we're seeing, like the 954 or whatever it was today, most of them are in these dormitories, which is still a problem, I would say, but it's notable that it's different from the rest of Singapore in that sense. Okay, yes, so how is it being handled in these dormitories, if at all? What's the condition of these people?
That I don't have much insight into what that looks like.
They live very close together, I'm assuming. They live.
Yeah, so I think they share rooms, like 2 or 3 people, something like that. More like a student house, I think it is, but
Right.
I'm not exactly sure exactly what those look like on the inside. But yeah, there's much more close contact, and as such, you have much more of these outbreaks. Yeah.
Right. And they are in lockdown as well now, so they are supposed to stay inside within their dormitories with the whole.
Yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of rules there in terms of, I think everybody's getting tested. People who test positive will be isolated from the other ones. So I think they take the opportunity now in the next, what do we have, 2-3 weeks left in this circuit breaker, to find all those cases there and make sure that they stay isolated. I think that's the plan, but obviously I'm not part of the government here, but that seems to be the case, and seems to be a credible strategy. What they've done also is that it's now compulsory to wear a mask if you go outside for everybody. So if I go outside downstairs here, I need to wear a mask. There's enforcement officers walking around that can give you a fine of $300 if you're not wearing a mask. There were a couple of reports today of people that did not stick to those rules, and it was actually, interestingly, it was mostly older Singaporeans. I think there was like a 70-year-old guy who gave a headbutt to an enforcement officer, which was quite funny. So the mask rule is there, so everybody's wearing masks now. Everybody's staying home. It's really quiet on the streets. All the offices are closed. I can still go to the supermarket, but safe distancing is strictly enforced. We actually went to McDonald's yesterday, and even at McDonald's, they have like these lines in front of the entrance, and there's a guy at the entrance, like just taking your temperature, letting people in like one at a time. So they are super organized in that and enforcing that, and I would assume that actually works. You know, if you have 4 weeks of this, then I think it's pretty hard for the virus to actually continue to spread.
What about travel restrictions? Is the airport completely closed now, or are people still entering the country? How did the new cases spread? Were they imported as well?
Yeah, so that's how it got started. Like that's how it got a bit worse here, because a lot of people were coming back, Singaporeans from overseas or foreigners from overseas, and a lot of it was actually imported from the US or Europe. That's how they got more of these untracked cases. And now basically, yeah, the like inbound travel is severely restricted, pretty much closed, I'd say. Even one of my colleagues who has an employment pass here and works here all the time, you need to apply to come back into Singapore, and his application was denied. So he's stuck in Australia for now. So even if you work here and you live here, you still have to apply to come back. Unless you're a citizen, of course, you can always come back. But yeah, other than that, I think for Europe or US, it's completely closed at the moment.
I'm imagining that Singapore is very reliant on international supply chains as well. I mean, I've never been to Singapore, but I can't imagine they have a large farming population. It's a city state, right? So how is that playing out? Do you think that could be a problem over there?
I think it could be if this goes on for much longer. So what I know about it is that they have pretty good stockpiles, or they always have pretty good stockpiles of most like non-perishable stuff, right? And a lot of vegetables and fruits and stuff like that comes from Malaysia. I think there are disruptions in those supply chains. I did see a news report yesterday on how the few farmers that there are in Singapore, they are doing a lot more now. So there's a couple of these vertical farms here that grow kind of different types of vegetables than you would normally get from Malaysia, but those are doing much better business. What they've communicated publicly, I think, was that they have enough supplies, or like for 6 months or something like that, and enough food, enough whatever that means for 6 months. And they were working actively to open up different supply lines for stuff that they couldn't get from Malaysia at the moment. So I'm not too concerned about that, because it's such a port. Actually, I think there was a news report yesterday that exports actually jumped last quarter in Singapore, like against the expectation of a shrinkage, which was pretty much because of pharmaceutical products and stuff like that. So there's so much trade and supply happening here that I don't think Singapore is going to get into any issues there. But yeah, of course, if it's longer than a couple of months, you probably see some shortages in some certain products, but not too concerned there.
Right. Have you been keeping track of what's been going on in the Netherlands?
Yeah, I love to keep track, and it still surprises me every day. Like you see a little bit of change coming, but I think the last time we discussed what it was, like ignorance or culture or something. I think it's pretty much down to culture, which is slowly changing. You see it across Europe, right? Like first Austria is changing where you need to wear masks now if you go into the supermarket. I think Germany is recommending it. The UK is thinking about it, but it seems to be that the institutions in the Netherlands are a bit, I don't know, old-fashioned, or they're not very open in their communication. They base their information on sources that we don't really know who they are, or if it's WHO, I don't know about those guys either. So yeah, I see some opinion pieces in some of the newspapers now saying, hey, maybe we should actually wear masks. I'm like, yeah, you should. But
yeah,
they're still
officially recommending against masks, which is just
that is absolutely like mind-boggling to me.
yes.
Like, how can they do that, right? It's just so simple. Of course it helps, right? If you're in a train and you and your neighbor are wearing a mask, obviously it's less likely that you'll spread your droplets or spread your sneeze to the next person. Like, it's just common sense.
It is baffling. I'm personally past the point of caring at all of what they recommend or say. It's just whatever. We'll deal with that later. Oh, that's the funny thing.
I don't know. Do you think they would change, or like, do you think the people in the Netherlands would actually change their behavior if the government recommends something differently, or they wouldn't care either way?
I think so. I think it would probably help at least. I don't know. I definitely see very, very few people with masks. I've seen like 2 people in the supermarket the other day, out of dozens that I've seen over the past weeks, or maybe 3, but it's almost no one. Yeah, no, I think it would help if the government would at least sort of make it official that an official recommendation would probably sort of change people's minds a little bit. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I think it will come. It's just, I see it within my family that I'm chatting to, right? Like, they were also in the beginning, that's ridiculous, we're never going to do that. But now you slowly see it, and I think it's just a culture change, and I think it will come, maybe another month or 2.
Yeah, another interesting factoid was yesterday there was a presentation before Parliament. Last time when we spoke, one of the things we speculated was, hey, if you've been a bureaucrat and a desk job for 30 years without having to deal with any big problems, then you're probably not very trained to deal with big problems. And you have the GGD guy, Jacques de Gauw. He almost literally said, he didn't say that literally, but it was pretty close what he said in Parliament. When he was explaining who he was saying, yeah, I'm Jacques de Gauw. I've been head of GGD for 12 years. It was an easy desk job so far, and now that's how he was presenting himself. And that was exactly that was my impression of him. Yeah, he's had a very easy job, and now all of a sudden he's hurled in the middle of a pandemic, and he's just not the type of guy that knows how to think fast and deal with problems.
So I think they will get there, but it will, like, it's just costing so many lives, like the speed at which they're getting there. That's the frustrating part, I guess. But I think eventually they'll come to the right conclusions. But
the interesting thing is that so far there still seem to be different policies. So like you said, and like we just discussed, in Singapore, even though there is now sort of an outbreak, the goal appears to be to eradicate the virus as much as possible. That's what they want to do. While in the Netherlands, last I checked, there was herd immunity, and then they sort of didn't want to use that word anymore, and now it's sort of unclear what the actual goal is. But it doesn't appear to me that the goal is to eradicate the virus. The goal is still Probably herd immunity or sort of a wait and see approach, waiting for more data. But I think that's interesting. So we're going to see how this plays out in Singapore, where they do still have this goal, even though there now has been a bit of an outbreak, and now we can see how effective it is if you really do put your
I don't know. I don't know either. What's the right answer here, right? We might actually, like, will they be able to stop it here forever? I highly doubt that as well, right? Like, they can't keep the borders closed for 6 months. Like, Singapore economy is completely open, so at some point they'll have to reopen. I think they'll reopen, but then with really strict rules, and like, you need to apply before you come in, and health certificates and checks and all these kind of things. But maybe in the end it will show that actually Sweden's approach was the best. But I think it's very irresponsible to take that approach without having that data or without having that information up front, right? Like, I just saw a report on, I think it was on Sky News, where they were saying, if you were infected, like, you might not even have immunity. That's kind of important information. Like, if that is the case, then you can't even go for herd immunity, right? Then your whole strategy was flawed from the beginning. So
if you build your whole policy on the assumption that people build immunity, then it's not very good news if there's no immunity. But that's what you mentioned just now. I think that's sort of the main question between these policies is, well, immunity is one big question, and then the other thing is how big of a risk is a second wave. So if you go the Singaporean approach or the Asian approach, and then you just get hit by a second wave, then you didn't really win much. And that's sort of, I guess, what the West is banking on, that there will be a second wave either way, so we might as well get over with it.
So one of the things that, like, this guy on Twitter, what's his name? I think you also mentioned him on the Bitcoin show, Bert Slachter.
Bert Slachter,
he had this thing about asymmetric measures, right? Which masks is one of those. It's damn cheap. You can continue life as normal.
Regardless of which policy you take, whether you want to go for the herd immunity thing within ICU capacity or you want to suppress it, asymmetric measures are always a good idea. And so for those who don't know what this is, this means a measure that costs less than it offers benefits, like wearing a mask. It costs very little, but it does have benefits.
Because I saw you proposed, or there's some kind of a Shark Tank style show coming up with like 7 Corona apps that have been proposed.
Yes.
Why are you talking about these apps? Like, so Singapore has an app, but the latest statistic I saw was that only like 16% of people or so are actually using it, in which case it's not very helpful to start with. So I cannot imagine more people. Like, people here are pretty good in, like, listening to the government and doing the best for society. I cannot imagine the percentage being higher in the Netherlands than if even if there's an app, right? So it's just
we'll have to see. They haven't. They might make it obligated. I mean, they haven't decided that yet, but they don't exclude the possibility of making the app obligatory, which would be a pretty drastic step as well, obligating people to run specific software on their own machines.
Talk about privacy invasion there.
That's the other issue. I think most of the apps that have been proposed so far haven't had a very good reception from tech experts. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Well, all right. Well, Kenrick, this was an interesting update. Is there anything we missed? Is there anything else we should know about Singapore?
I think it will be interesting to see now. So we're just like coming through this first kind of incubation cycle, right? Since the circuit breaker started, and from what I can see all around me, like, people are adhering to it pretty well, extremely well, I would say. So you would actually expect by, what do we have, Saturday now? So by the middle of next week or so, you should actually expect to see those community cases, so outside of the dormitories, drop to very, very low numbers. Like if these measures actually work. I think that's a good data point, and to see like if you actually do this and you go into this lockdown with these measures, that actually works or not. We'll see. So that's an interesting experiment. So that's kind of the two extremes, right? So we have Sweden on the one hand, and then Singapore on the other, almost.
Well, I think even Sweden is sort of starting to start to impose some level of lockdowns, and I think maybe Belarus would be an even better example. I've heard that that's the only European country where they're still having football matches and just
nice.
I don't know if that's still the case. That was the case a week ago or 2 weeks ago. But yeah, let's check back in a couple of weeks or a month from now or so to see how this.
Yeah, sounds good. Post the Bitcoin halving. Maybe the halving will fix this.
That's in about 4 weeks. When is that planned?
Yeah, just 24 days. It's coming up.
Yeah, I almost forgot about that.
I know, right? So much happening. Totally forgot about the halving.
All right, Kenrick, thanks a lot.
All right, Aaron.
See ya.
See you later.